My father said I was a curse, refused to let me eat at the table, and made me clean up after everyone. When I got my first job, he mocked me in front of strangers. I smiled. And built something bigger. Last week, I bought the land his house is on. And the eviction notice? Hand-delivered. I'm Selena Worthing. I was born in 1983 in a town about 20 minutes outside Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of place where people wave when they pass you on the road, even if they don't like you. We had long summers, thick with humidity and mosquitoes, and everyone knew everyone's business, except what happened inside our house. My mother, Priscilla, died giving birth to me. From that moment on, my father, Harold Worthing, made sure I knew it was my fault. He had this way of speaking without raising his voice, but every word cut like broken glass. He'd tell people, "She took my wife and gave me nothing back." He never called me by my name. Just the curse. That's what I was, the curse. Not even my daughter. Just a walking reminder of what he lost. My older brother, Wes, got all the attention. He was 5 years older and everything my father wanted, a boy, tall, blonde, strong-jawed, and willing to do whatever Harold said. I was the opposite. I didn't talk much. I read books I found in the attic. I liked being alone. That made me weird in my father's eyes. We lived in an old 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and wraparound porch that could have been charming if the inside wasn't filled with so much venom. 3 acres of land my grandfather once farmed, now mostly weeds and rusted equipment. My father ran a mechanic shop off Highway 17, a small place with 6 bays and a big red Coke machine out front. Everyone knew Harold the mechanic. He was honest with customers, friendly with old men at the bar, even polite to teachers at school meetings. But he wasn't honest with me. At home, I wasn't allowed to eat at the dinner table. That was reserved for him, Wes, and occasionally whatever friend or woman happened to be over. I'd be given a plate after they were done, often with cold food or scraps, and told to eat it standing at the counter or sitting on a plastic stool in the laundry room. After dinner, I'd clean up every plate, fork, and crumb. My father was obsessed with order, but only when it came to appearances. If the counters weren't perfectly clean or if the silverware had a smudge, he'd toss it all back in the sink and say, "Try again, curse." I got used to sleeping without dinner sometimes. He'd claim I forgot my place and tell me to go to bed hungry. Wes never stood up for me. I don't think he hated me, but he liked being liked. And standing up to Harold would have meant losing that golden boy status. When I was about 12, I remember sitting behind the tool shed out back, eating a piece of cornbread I'd saved from lunch and crying because I was too scared to let anyone see me cry in the house. That was the first time I said the words out loud, "I'm not going to live here forever." It became my mantra. By 16, I found a job cleaning offices in Charleston. I lied and said I was doing a work study for school, just to avoid questions. The bus ride took nearly an hour, but I didn't care. It was the first time I'd had real money of my own. I hid it in the air vent in my bedroom, singles, fives, the occasional 20. I remember the first time my father found out. I was late getting home because the bus broke down. When I walked in, he was sitting on the couch with 2 of his friends, Bud and Kenny, half drunk, laughing about God knows what. "There she is," Harold said. "The curse with a mop. I think she's somebody now." They laughed, and I just stood there. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, this tight little smile that even scared me a little. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. researching GED prep. I was homeschooled, kind of. Mostly my brother's old textbooks and a lot of just read the Bible. I taught myself. Flashcards. Online quizzes at the library. Every day, every spare minute between schoolwork and my job went to getting out. I got my GED at 18. The morning I got the letter confirming I'd passed, I packed 2 bags, left a note on the fridge, and walked out without saying goodbye. I didn't know where I was going yet, I just knew I was never coming back. I stayed in a women's shelter for 2 weeks, then got a room with a woman named Paulette who rented it to me for cheap if I helped clean her house. I applied to Trident Technical College and was accepted for the spring semester. I paid for my first semester with savings, a small grant, and 3 jobs, cleaning a dentist office, waiting tables on weekends, and tutoring kids at a community center. I never told anyone where I came from. The people I met during those years still don't know the full story. They saw a quiet, driven woman who always volunteered to close the cafe or stay late to cover a shift. They didn't know I'd spent a decade eating cold leftovers and being told I didn't deserve to breathe the same air as my family. I studied business administration because I wanted to learn how money moved, how businesses worked, what power really looked like. After college, I got an entry-level admin job at a freight company in Charleston. 6 months in, I made a proposal that saved them thousands in fuel costs. A year later, I was running the regional logistics team. By 30, I'd started my own company, Worthing Logistics Solutions. I pulled every dollar I had, took a bank loan, and lived on ramen and black coffee for 2 years straight. I was exhausted, borderline burned out, but I was free. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from my cousin Daniel. He did land surveying and zoning contracts and still lived back in my hometown. "Selena," he said, "I don't know if this is something you want to hear, but the land your father's house sits on? It's not actually his." My heart stopped. Apparently, the land, 3 acres and the house, had technically belonged to my grandfather, who died without a proper will. The property passed to Harold unofficially, but legally it was still under an uncle's name who'd since passed away. That uncle's son, my second cousin, was selling it. Daniel didn't know the history. He just thought it might be useful to someone in the family. I asked him to send me the paperwork. That same day, I called my attorney. 3 weeks later, I was the legal owner of the property at 317 Russell Pines Road. The house. The land. All of it. It was mine. I drove out there the night the deed was finalized. I hadn't been on that road in over a decade, and I swear, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel like I was 16 again, coming home late and dreading what would be waiting for me on the porch. But this time, I wasn't coming back as the cursed girl who cleaned up after everyone else. I parked across the street and just sat in the dark, staring at the house. It looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down. The paint had faded to a sickly gray. One of the porch steps was rotting out. There were rusted tools and empty beer bottles scattered around the yard. The same place that once felt like a prison now looked like it was collapsing under its own weight. I saw him, my father, on the porch, sitting in that old rocking chair with a cigarette in his mouth. He still had that thick, wiry white hair and wore his flannel shirts even when it was too hot. For a second, I wondered if he even recognized me anymore. But I didn't get out of the car. Not yet. I went back the next day during daylight. This time, I wore my work blazer and boots that cost more than my father probably spent on clothes in the last 5 years. My hair was pulled back, my documents neatly packed in a leather folder. I walked up that same driveway I used to run down barefoot when I was little, hoping to catch the school bus before Harold yelled at me for missing it. I knocked once on the door. It creaked open and there he was, staring at me like I was a ghost. "Well, look who the wind dragged in," he said, voice raspy but still full of that same sharpness. "The curse herself." I smiled. It felt different this time. Stronger. Wiser. "I'm here on business, Harold." I made a point not to call him Dad. He scoffed. "What kind of business would someone like you have here?" I handed him the envelope. He opened it without looking at me, then scanned the papers. His eyebrows furrowed. I could see the disbelief settle in. His fingers trembled slightly as he read the deed transfer, the zoning documents, the ownership confirmation. "You bought it?" he asked, eyes flicking up. "I did," I said calmly. "The land, the house. It's all mine now." He stared at me. For the first time in my entire life, he was silent. "I'm giving you 60 days, I said. "Then I'll be moving forward with demolition." You can't just take my house," he said, stumbling over the words. "I built this with my own hands." "No," I corrected, "you built it on land you never legally owned. It never belonged to you, Harold. You just squatted long enough that people assumed it did." "Where the hell am I supposed to go?" I looked around the living room. Same grimy armchair. Same wood-paneled walls. Same bitter stench of stale beer. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something else. Maybe scream. Maybe beg. Maybe call me every name he used to when I was too small to fight back. But I didn't stay to find out. I turned and walked out. As I stepped off the porch, I caught a glimpse of Wes through the living room window. He must have come in through the back. His eyes met mine, and he looked tired. Maybe ashamed. Maybe not. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I got in my car and drove off, the letter of ownership tucked safely in my passenger seat. That night, I slept better than I had in 20 years. But the story doesn't end there. Not yet. Because Harold? He didn't leave quietly. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer. "Selena," she said, her voice clipped and professional, "your father has filed a motion to contest the ownership transfer." I didn't even sigh. I expected it. "Of course he did," I said. "He's claiming adverse possession. Says he's lived on the property and maintained it exclusively for over 20 years. He thinks that gives him a claim." I'd already prepared for that. I'd read up on South Carolina property law months ago when Daniel first mentioned the land. And yes, adverse possession was a real thing. But it required continuous, exclusive, and hostile possession for at least 10 years, with the knowledge and opposition of the legal owner. But the land had legally belonged to his cousin, who hadn't even known it was occupied until recently. There were no taxes paid by Harold. No title claim. Just years of assumption and entitlement. "Tell the court we're ready to respond," I said. "I'm not backing down." It became a legal dance. Harold tried every angle. He claimed he'd paid property taxes, he hadn't. He said he made improvements to the land, he built a shed out of scrap wood in 1995 and called it an investment. He even accused me of fraud. That part stung a little. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice still wanted him to recognize that I hadn't cheated or stolen. That I'd earned this. That I had done it the right way. But Harold never cared about what was right. Only what was his. Meanwhile, word started spreading in town. Old men at the gas station started whispering. Some people saw me as the city girl who came back to kick her daddy out of his home. Others? They remembered how Harold treated me. I started getting emails. Messages. Quiet ones, from neighbors, old teachers, even a former mechanic who used to work at my father's shop. "Good for you, Selena," one of them wrote. "He was never kind to you." We all saw it. We just didn't say anything. Funny how silence looks a lot like complicity when you're a child. Around that time, Wes reached out. He texted me. Just a single sentence. "We need to talk." I didn't reply right away. Took me a full day to decide. Then I agreed to meet him, at a diner just off the highway, the kind of place with sticky tables and laminated menus. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since I left. He looked older. Thinner. His hair was thinning out, and there was a deep crease between his eyebrows that hadn't been there before. "You serious about this?" he asked me, skipping the small talk. "Yes," I said. He rubbed his jaw, like he was trying to massage the words out of his face. "You know he's not going to take this lying down." "I'm counting on it," I said. "Why now? After all these years?" That one stopped me. I thought for a moment, then said, "Because I finally have the power to do what no one else ever did, hold him accountable." Wes nodded slowly, like he understood. But then he leaned in. "I'm not saying you don't deserve justice," he said. "But he's not well. He's drinking more. He's barely keeping up with the shop. He's going to spiral if this happens." I looked at him for a long time. Part of me pitied Harold, really pitied him. The old man in that falling down house, clinging to something he thought would always be his. But another part of me, stronger, louder, remembered standing in a cold kitchen at 11 years old, washing plates while they laughed in the next room. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," I said. "But I'm also not stopping to protect him anymore." Wes didn't argue. He just looked tired. A few days later, Harold called me. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. "Taking back what should have been mine to begin with," I said, steady. "You ungrateful little," I hung up. He tried calling back 3 more times that day. I didn't answer. I had no desire to argue with a man who couldn't even say my name after 30+ years. 2 weeks after that, the court dismissed his claim. Lack of documentation. No legal standing. My name stayed on the deed. That should have been the end. But Harold wasn't done. One night, I drove by the property just to check. Something didn't feel right. When I pulled up to the house, the front yard was lit by the faint orange glow of a fire pit. He'd set up lawn chairs in a circle, with 3 or 4 old guys sitting around drinking beers. It looked like a last stand, one of those pitiful, stubborn statements men make when they realize the world isn't going to bend for them anymore. He saw my car and stood up, arms spread wide. "You think a piece of paper means anything?" he shouted. I didn't respond. He kept yelling. "This is my land. I bled on this land. You don't get to take that from me." I got out of the car and walked to the edge of the driveway. "I didn't take it from you," I said quietly. "You never owned it. You smug little bitch," he spat. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I know I am." One of the men beside him stood up, trying to calm him down. The others avoided looking at me. I turned and left. I didn't need to explain myself to Harold Worthing. I had the law on my side. I had the deed. And for the first time in my life, I had power he couldn't touch. Still, I knew things were escalating. The next morning, I found tire tracks in my driveway back in Charleston. I started locking my gates. Installed cameras. I didn't know if it was him, but I wasn't taking chances. And then, 2 weeks before the deadline, I got a call from Daniel again. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. "Bring your lawyer." We met on the property that afternoon. Harold had started tearing out the floorboards inside the house. Ripping out cabinets. Breaking glass. He was destroying it, piece by piece, out of pure spite. "Is this legal?" I asked, dumbfounded. "He's trying to devalue the house," Daniel said. "If it's wrecked, it's harder to sell or build on." My attorney took pictures. Lots of them. We filed for a restraining order and a cease and desist. I didn't care about the house, honestly. The building meant nothing to me. But it was the principle. After everything, even when legally defeated, Harold was still trying to claw something back. Still trying to win. But this wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a tantrum I'd have to clean up after. This time, he was going to face real consequences. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. 2 days after filing a restraining order, we got the court date expedited. Harold didn't bother showing up. The judge reviewed the photos, the property damage estimates, the aggressive voicemails I had recorded from his late-night calls. It was all laid bare in front of a quiet courtroom, the same way I'd once been laid bare, invisible and humiliated in my own home. The ruling was swift. I was granted full protective order enforcement and the right to evict him early based on the willful destruction of property. He had 10 days to vacate, or law enforcement would remove him. The officer who served the final notice said Harold just sat there reading it, silent. Numb. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just folded the letter neatly and went inside without a word. And still, a part of me waited for him to do something awful. To torch the house. To chain himself to the porch. To try to drag my name through the mud in some final tantrum. But he didn't. Maybe because even he knew, deep down, that the fight was over. The day he was supposed to be gone, I drove out to the property with Daniel and a uniformed deputy just in case. The house was empty. No note. No sign of him. Just silence, and the smell of mildew and rot. The kitchen was gutted. The floor scratched and splintered. But the walls were still standing. I walked through it slowly, stepping over debris, dust catching in the light. I paused in the room that used to be mine, the cold back bedroom with the broken closet door. The corner where I'd hidden my first paycheck. The patch of wall where I once wrote my name in pencil and immediately scrubbed it off, terrified he'd see it. And then I walked outside, onto the porch where he used to sit like a king watching his kingdom. The wood creaked beneath my feet. I took in a breath of that thick Charleston air, full of wet pine and old memories. I nodded to the contractor standing by the truck at the end of the driveway. "Start today," I said. The demolition team arrived an hour later. And I stayed for every second of it. I watched as the porch came down first, plank by plank, ripped off like peeling skin. Then the roof collapsed inward with a crash that startled the birds out of the trees. Walls crumbled. Windows shattered. A lifetime of tyranny reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quiet. Heavy. Final. I didn't shed a tear. After the demolition, I didn't rebuild. I didn't turn it into a business lot or a new home. Instead, I cleared the land, planted native grass, and put up a wooden bench at the edge of the property under the old live oak tree that had outlived both my grandfather and the house. No plaque. No sign. Just a bench. Sometimes, when I drive by on my way to meetings or when I visit Daniel for lunch, I stop and sit there for a while. No one ever asks who owns it. They probably assume it's public land or part of a park. That's fine. I didn't do all this to show off. I did it because that house represented everything that once kept me small. And now, it's gone. As for Harold, word got around that he moved into a trailer park near Somerville. Wes helps him sometimes, I think, but they don't talk much anymore. I've heard he spends most of his days drinking and watching reruns of old westerns. I don't know if he ever tells people he has a daughter. If he does, I wonder what he says. I never saw him again after the eviction. Never heard from him either. And honestly, I don't need to. I didn't go looking for an apology. I didn't need him to say you were right. Because I already know I was. My company's grown a lot since then. We opened a second office in Atlanta, and I've started mentoring young women coming out of difficult home situations. I never tell them the whole story, only pieces. But I tell them this: you don't need revenge to be free. But if you can make peace and make sure it never happens again, that's power. Because sometimes justice looks like a courtroom victory. Sometimes it looks like a check with your name on it. And sometimes it looks like a house coming down while you sip iced tea under an old oak tree, knowing the curse stopped with you.